Human resources employees, what are your best HR nightmare stories? Story 1. I am part of the HR team that supports a wide variety of U.S. cities for our company, including our colorful Florida locations. This is the best story I've heard. We had a woman who was trying to avoid doing work by sitting in her car in the parking lot. While she was hiding out there, she needed to use the restroom. Instead of going back inside or doing literally anything else, she decided to pee out of her car window. Even though I'm also a woman, I was both impressed and disgusted by the physics behind this feat. She had stuck her bare ass outside the window and just went for it. Unbeknownst to her, a male coworker had arrived late due to an appointment. As he drove past to find a parking spot, he got a full view of the scene. He immediately reported the incident to us. One of our HR representatives had to investigate, and sure enough, the parking lot cameras confirmed his story. When confronted, the woman's response was, "Well, how did he know it was me? It could have been anyone." Fair point, we thought. The cameras weren't exactly CSI grade, so we could only see the relevant parts, making it difficult to identify her face. So, we went back to the male employee and asked how he was so sure it was her. His response, "Oh, it was definitely her. The face tattoos are pretty recognizable. We definitely don't get paid enough for this." Story 2. I came into work early for a morning shift. I work in an industrial lab. As I was getting settled, I heard some noises coming from the back corner of the office area. The sounds were distorted, so I couldn't quite make out what was going on. Curious, and thinking I was the only one there at 3 a.m., I headed that way to check it out. That's when I saw my lab manager going at it with the district manager, her boss, while the HR rep for the district sat there, just enjoying the view. I immediately NOPE'd out of there, went straight to the lab, and tried to erase the whole thing from my memory. Story 3. My friend was doing hiring for a staffing agency during college when a guy we went to high school with came in looking for a job. My friend told him about 2 available positions. One paid $10 an hour, and the other paid $11. The catch? The $11 an hour job required a drug test, and if he failed, he wouldn't qualify for either job. The guy said he wanted the higher-paying job. Now, we knew him well enough to know he liked to smoke, so my friend reiterated the rule about failing the drug test. The guy assured him he'd be fine and scheduled the test for Monday. Come Monday, he took the test. He popped positive for weed, cocaine, amphetamines, and some other stuff that clears out of your system in about 48 hours. Story 4. My job is a constant HR nightmare, except we don't even have an HR department. My boss has slept with coworker A. Coworker A is married to coworker B. A and B have been, unhappily, married for about 10 years, and B has no idea about the affair, despite the fact that B invites the boss over for dinner every other week. Meanwhile, the boss is now dating a new coworker, who also happens to be my best friend, LOL. He's already gifted her $2,000, while another coworker, who has cancer, struggled to pay his bills when he was still working. As if that weren't enough, my other boss, who owns the lesser half of the company, once called me a narcissist in a meeting and literally told me, "There's no such thing as business ethics." And that's just the last couple of months. I've been here for 4 years. Story 5. I'm not in HR, but my previous senior manager was infamous for sleeping with colleagues, despite being married with kids. Before I even started working there, I remember seeing a massive banner plastered across a footbridge that everyone leaving work by car had to drive under to get to the motorway. The sign read, "Joe Blogs," not his real name, "cheating bastard." Turns out he had been cheating on his wife with a team leader from another department, while also cheating on his mistress with yet another team leader from a different department. Both women eventually found out about each other, and it all culminated in a massive fight right in the building's reception area. By the time I joined the company, both team leaders were long gone. Story 6. I was sitting in the HR office with one of the HR employees, waiting for her to finish a form so we could go to lunch. Suddenly, a young temp employee, who had only been there for about a week, walked in and said he had something to discuss. I started to get up to leave when he blurted out that he didn't like how many gays and lesbians were working at the company. At that point, I sat right back down. The HR employee asked him to clarify, and he went on about how his trainer was gay, his team lead was gay, and his manager was a lesbian. All true, and he just didn't feel comfortable working around so many LGBTQ+ people. The HR employee then asked, "Has anyone ever sexually harassed you?" He said no. She replied, "So you want me to fire these employees strictly based on their sexual orientation, just so you don't feel uncomfortable?" He confidently said yes. She immediately told him to leave the office. Then, she called in his manager to discuss the situation. By the end of the week, he had quit. Story 7. I don't work in HR, but I do have a nightmare HR story. During my gap year, I worked part-time as a fitness instructor at a leisure center. One of my co-workers, let's call him Bill, was a nice guy. We often chatted during breaks, and he had a long-term girlfriend and a baby at home. As part of my job, I taught spin classes regularly. I usually left my phone in the staff room or behind the reception desk while teaching, both secure areas, and my phone had a passcode. I didn't want it interfering with the stereo in the spin studio when receiving calls or texts. I didn't have a locker or anywhere else to store it. Around January, I was away at university for an interview weekend. My girlfriend at the time came to pick me up, and while waiting in the car, she was scrolling through my messages on my iPad. When I got in, she showed me a chat and asked, "Why did you send this video to Bill?" I had no recollection of ever sending him a video. In fact, outside of work, our messages were limited to things like, "I'm running late." At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I scrolled up, I saw that I had sent him the same video a couple of weeks prior. Completely confused, I clicked on it. It was a video of me, 20F, and my girlfriend, 26F, on holiday in Thailand. Nothing sexual, but we had just gotten out of the shower and were both naked, joking around. At this point, I was still convinced it had to be some kind of mistake. Bill was a nice guy, right? He had a baby at home. Then, I looked closer at the timestamps. The messages had been sent at times when I was teaching spin classes, when my phone was left unattended. That's when it hit me. Bill had memorized my passcode from all the times we had chatted on breaks. He had waited until I was in class to unlock my phone, go through my personal photos and videos, and send himself private content without my knowledge. Judging by the timestamps, he had already deleted the video once, which is why he had sent it to himself again a couple of weeks later. He also deleted the chat history on my iPhone, but didn't realize that it still synced to my iPad. This was around 2012, by the way. At the time the video was taken, I was only 18 or 19. I immediately reported him to my manager in HR, but the whole thing was a minefield for them to navigate. I don't know what he told them, but I imagine it was something like, "She sent it to me willingly. How would I have known her passcode?" It took ages to get sorted, but in the end, he was fired, thankfully. The police also paid him a visit. I'm sure he had some explaining to do to his girlfriend. Story 8. I had a bookkeeper who was paying himself 2 checks every week. We didn't catch it for an entire year. Another bookkeeper quit and filed for unemployment. Then, he filed a claim with the EEOC, alleging that he had a disability and we had failed to provide reasonable accommodations. His disability? Alcoholism. His requested accommodations? Leaving early to attend AA meetings. Yes, we actually had to hire a lawyer to fight that. I once hired a guy who injured himself within the first hour of his first day on the job. He claimed he fell and hit his head on a wall. He was out for weeks on workers' comp due to a concussion. When he finally returned on light duty, he could only do desk work, but somehow still managed to fall again in the bathroom and hit his head. It took me 9 months to get rid of him. Turns out, this wasn't his first rodeo. When I called his former employer, the woman I spoke to casually mentioned workplace accidents and head injuries, along with the importance of having cameras in the workplace. While doing a remodel at a museum, one of my employees decided to help himself to a gun that was on display. It was beyond ugly and embarrassing for everyone. My company was kicked off the job and permanently banned from working there again. I fired the guy immediately. Then he filed a discrimination claim with the EEOC because I didn't fire the entire crew, just him. I've got plenty more stories. Story 9. I used to work for a company that was an absolute HR nightmare. Here are just a few of the highlights. I was hired as the Director of Quality Regulatory, so I came in and started cleaning up documents, policies, and all the essential compliance work. One of the VPs of sales did not appreciate me fixing the things they had been lying about. Fraud. In front of HR, he told me, "I'm going to make you so miserable that you quit this job." He still works there. Another sales employee fell into a coma due to a health issue. The higher-ups actually considered firing him to keep their insurance costs lower and avoid paying out his life insurance. HR pointed out that this would likely lead to a massive lawsuit. The executives then debated the cost of the lawsuit and whether they could win. Ultimately, they kept him employed until he passed away a week later. When I left to start my own company, they decided they owned any IP I had created while working there. I had no contract, and non-compete agreements aren't even enforceable in my state. Oh, and to top it all of the C-level executives were convicted of corruption in multiple countries and are now in jail. Story 10. I was asked to translate for some visitors from the parent company at an HR-hosted celebration. I stopped translating around the time the director of HR started asking overly personal, sexual questions to the two young HR office ladies. A couple of days later, during a private conversation, I recounted the story to a friend who happened to be a director from the parent company. He immediately switched to professional mode and asked me to write up a report and submit a complaint to the parent company's HR. And that's when the nightmare began. It turned out that the local head of HR had been in charge of the sexual harassment prevention training that had narrowly saved them from a lawsuit. The CEO of the local company insisted that I bring the story out publicly and confront the director of HR like an adult. Meanwhile, parent company HR brought in HR reps from another local subsidiary to conduct an investigation. It became painfully obvious who the whistleblower was. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the investigation, but the next year at that company was hell for me. Even the office lady who had been subjected to the inappropriate questioning resented me for dragging her into the controversy. I left as soon as I could. I wasn't the least bit sad to hear that the company went bankrupt and was broken up a couple of years later. They had other issues as well. Story 11. I work in HR, and we recently transitioned from one HRIS system to another, a system that manages personal information like benefits, time off requests, contact details, etc. Part of the transition involved teaching the workforce how to use the app. This came with plenty of challenges, including boomers who are technologically illiterate, employees who speak very little English, and managers who think learning the system is beneath them. I'm usually patient with the language barrier. I mean, it's not like I'm bilingual either, so if someone has even the basics of English as a second language, they already know more than I do. One fine day, I had a constant stream of employees asking for help accessing the system on their phones, despite the step-by-step written and pictorial instructions. Then, an older employee approached me and asked for help. The moment I looked at his phone, XXX hardcore porn started popping up in his browser. He genuinely couldn't understand why I couldn't help him. No matter what I typed in, the browser just kept redirecting to porn. I usually have a good handle on troubleshooting people's phones, but this was beyond me. I couldn't tell if the poor guy had a virus, or if he was messing with me. Creepy old dude, about my dad's age, barely spoke English, and wasn't even embarrassed about the raunchy porn stuck on his screen. I told him to clean up his phone and not come back until it was fixed. I haven't seen him since. Story 12. Not an HR employee, but a manager who was handed an HR nightmare to resolve. Someone will get a kick out of this. Background. I was working as a teller manager at a small regional bank. My branch was surrounded by 6 small colleges within a 30-minute drive, and the company liked to hire college students as tellers. Since they usually didn't want full-time work, no benefits equals cheaper to employ, and had random availability, it was easy to schedule even the unpopular shifts. At the time, all of the tellers in my branch were college students. One day, I got a call from the regional HR manager. He informed me that they were transferring a teller from another branch across town, a teller who had been nothing but a headache. My instructions? Document every single thing she does wrong, no matter how minor. Apparently, she had alienated all of her previous coworkers by filing multiple HR complaints against them. I'll call her TT, transferred teller. I reached out to one of her former managers for more details. Turns out, TT was a college student with exactly 2 hobbies: riding her horse, going to church. That was it. She only wanted to talk about her horse, her beliefs, and converting her co-workers to her religion. Any other topic of conversation, she'd find a way to claim it was a violation of her beliefs, criticize her, or say anything that she wouldn't do. HR complaint. TT arrives at my branch. Day 1. She goes off on another teller for talking about a date her boyfriend took her on. Day 2. She files her first HR complaint, sexual harassment, against a coworker for simply mentioning a certain famous dating app. While taking the complaint, I discovered she was extremely socially conservative. Now, the employee handbook stated that what counted as harassment depended on whoever was the most easily offended person in the room. So, I pulled each teller aside for a one-on-one meeting to go over the harassment policies and warn them to be extra careful about what they said at work. I didn't single out TT, but everyone knew who I was talking about. Word about her had already spread. The complaints keep rolling in. For the next few weeks, she filed a new complaint roughly every other day. Every single complaint was about normal 18 to 22-year-old behavior, such as a coworker went to a party and had a one-night stand. A coworker hugged her boyfriend when he brought her lunch. A coworker wore a blouse that showed a bit of cleavage. A coworker refused to wake up early on Sunday and go to church with her. Morale plummeted. Everyone was stressed coming into work. Most of the staff refused to talk to TT entirely. I kept grumbling to HR about the situation, but their only response was, just document everything. So I did. I wrote up every minor infraction, tardies, drawer errors, anything I could. I categorized them, and when I had enough for each category, I submitted formal write-ups to HR for approval. The final straw. I was expecting we'd be stuck with TT for months before I could gather enough infractions to get HR to fire her. But then, she made the mistake we needed. There's a well-known religious group in our state, and their headquarters happened to be in our city. The group's religious leader occasionally came into our branch. For some reason, he liked handling deposits and transfers himself. Now, everyone knew that once you engaged him in conversation, he would start preaching. The usual strategy? Smile, nod, finish his transaction, and move on. But TT? She couldn't do that. Apparently, her church had serious theological disagreements with his church. So when he walked in and she called him next in line, things escalated fast. She recognized the name of his church on the transaction. They started talking, then arguing, then yelling. Unfortunately, I was in the back and missed the whole thing. Fortunately, I was still in the building, so it went on long enough for him to take serious offense. We had to drag her into the back office to separate them. The customer immediately filed a formal complaint. I documented the whole thing as an official customer complaint, which meant it went straight to a VP and the operations director. I also CC'd HR. The aftermath. Religious harassment of a commercial client with millions on deposit? That was more than enough for HR to terminate her the next day. Story 13. Where do I even start? The employee who was afraid of ghosts. We once hired an employee who refused to work after dark because he was scared of ghosts. During his interview, he actually asked if the building was haunted. He was also from a culture where he didn't respect female bosses. If I asked him to do something, he'd say, okay, then literally stuff the task between files and storage so I wouldn't find it. If my husband, co-owner, asked him to do something, he couldn't jump high enough up his ass to get it done. On top of that, he accused every single female employee of sexually harassing him because his wife didn't appreciate it. When I asked for examples, he said, a 55-year-old woman, sweet as a grandma, once asked him what cologne he was wearing. It did smell like he wore the whole bottle. At some point, a friend suggested I hire him. I said we had already hired him and that things weren't working out due to his wife's complaints. Her response? Wife? He's gay. Haven't you met his husband? Apparently, he had been bringing his sister as his wife to work events. After he left our company, he applied for another job and listed my husband as a reference. A woman called to do a check, but when my husband told her that I had worked with him, not him, she refused to speak with me because my name wasn't listed. She asked my husband about his job duties, and after my husband explained, there was a long pause. She finally said, that's not what he listed. He said he did. Insert high-level responsibilities. My husband. Yeah, those were my duties as manager and business owner. He never had access to any of that. In fact, he refused to take direction from my wife at all. The woman ended the call quickly. The employee who kept stealing money and lied about cancer. Before we invested in cameras, we had a constant problem with money disappearing. We had a strong suspicion about who was doing it, but we couldn't catch her. She manipulated us hard. This was our first year, and I was naive. She always had some new, fake type of cancer as an excuse for missing work. Then, one day, a furious client stormed into my office and said that she, and several others, would pull their business if we didn't fire her. I wasn't originally from this area, so I had no background info on her beyond her reference check. Turns out, she had a history of stealing money and credit card numbers from multiple workplaces. But she had never been charged because she always apologized and repaid what she stole. Everything suddenly made sense. After we fired her, the money stopped disappearing. Later on, she reapplied for a job with us, and her resume was so heavily padded that I turned it into a drinking game. The job duties she listed from her time with us didn't exist. Were actually my job. Pro tip: if you're going to lie on your resume, don't send it to your former boss. The employee who drank on the job and ended up in the psych ward. One employee developed a serious drinking problem. At first, I didn't think much of it. They were a hard worker, put in long hours, and barely took a lunch break. But I noticed they were stepping outside every 15 minutes for a cigarette. Then, I started finding hidden alcohol bottles around the workplace. One day, I caught them in the act, but that wasn't even the worst part. That same day, they had also overdosed on antidepressants, and I had to rush them to the ER. Once we got there, they kept trying to strip and run while we held them down. They were admitted to the psych ward. I didn't hear anything for a few days. Then, out of nowhere, they just showed up at work again. Turns out, the hospital had let them out on day passes so they could come back to work because they'd be in the hands of a responsible adult. No one had cleared this with me. The employee who literally forgot to come back from a smoke break. This one started off great. On time, professional, great office etiquette. I thought I had hit the jackpot. One day, she went out for a smoke break and forgot to come back. The next day, I asked what happened. She looked completely confused and said she did come back. I pulled up the time clock and camera footage and showed her. Her response? I have no idea what happened. After that, she started missing shifts. Then, on a busy Friday, she no-call, no-showed. I couldn't get a hold of her. Another employee who had gone on lunch came back and said, "She's outside, lying in the street, drunk." I went out to talk to her. She was adamant that she didn't work that day. Her glasses were broken. She was scraped up, and she was with two sketchy-looking men who were way too intimidating. She ran away from me. She missed her shift again the next day. On Sunday, she emailed me. I was in the hospital with a liver infection. I'll bring in a doctor's note Monday. Monday rolls around. No note. Tuesday, still no note. When I asked for it, she said she'd go home to get it. She never came back. She later claimed she didn't even remember seeing me when she was drunk. She was still wearing the same broken glasses. Story 14. Government Employer HR Nightmare. A government agency fired a popular program manager who had 250 employees under him, all of whom loved him. By policy, he was entitled to a public hearing about his dismissal if he wanted one. After his HR meeting and his private hearing with agency leadership, he demanded the public hearing. Big mistake. The showdown. The auditorium was packed. All 250 employees showed up to advocate for him. His lawyer kicked things off with an impassioned opening statement, claiming that his client was fired for caring too much, refusing to cut corners the agency brass wanted cut, protecting his people from politicians trying to score points, standing up for what's right, blah blah blah. The crowd cheered. Then, our HR director stood up. The boos started immediately. She calmly informed the audience why he was actually fired. He had forged every single one of his employees' legally required assessment forms, documents that determined raises and promotions. 250 forms. 250 forged signatures. She then put the evidence up on screen. The aftermath. It was blatantly obvious. Turns out, he had run out of time and didn't want to get reprimanded for his long-standing disorganization. Instead of owning up to it, he decided to forge a shit ton of government documents. He knew the agency had all the evidence. He had already been confronted twice. He had admitted to it. And yet, he still lied to every single person in that room and acted like he was being fired for being awesome. The entire crowd of 250 people got up and walked out, furious. The fallout. He became a pariah overnight. He had to move just to escape the backlash. Story 15. Finally, I can tell this story. I managed a smaller company and also served as the de facto HR guy. One of my employees occasionally needed rides to work, so I'd pick him up when necessary. The incident. One day, while driving him to work, he casually dropped this bombshell. Apparently, an employee at the company we serviced had approached him, saying that one of our employees had cornered her in the break room and wouldn't let her leave. Kept trying to get close to her. Bragged that he had family in upper management at her company. Repeatedly asked where she lived for some fucking reason. Basically, he was hitting on her hard. The moment I heard trapped her in the break room, I U-turned at full speed and drove straight back to the site. Confronting the victim, I ran frantically inside and found the woman, who, ironically, I vaguely knew from high school. I pulled her aside and asked what happened. She confirmed everything. Now, here's the thing, this guy was married. But the way she repeated his exact words, it was way too specific to be a lie. Plus, we had 0 previous harassment complaints. I had no reason to think she was making it up. I apologized profusely and assured her she would never have to see him there again. She was incredibly kind and understanding. Confronting the creep, let's call him Dan. With my other employees still in the car, I sped to Dan's house. I banged on the door. He answered, and I immediately demanded the keys for the on-site vehicle. Once he handed them over, I unleashed hell. Me. So I heard an interesting story about how you wouldn't leave this girl alone, kept asking where she lived, and wouldn't let her leave the break room. Dan immediately glances over his shoulder. His wife is in the kitchen listening. He steps outside and lowers his voice. Dan, I didn't talk to anyone. Me. They have cameras, so how about I go ask security to check? At this point, he starts leading me away from the front door toward the parking lot, trying to get me out of earshot of his wife. She cracks the door open, clearly trying to listen in. Dan, whispering now, I was in the break room with some chick, but I didn't do anything except say hello and ask if I was in her way for cleaning. I wasn't buying it. Me. I find it odd that we've had that location for over a year, and 1 week after I put you there, I get the first harassment complaint I've ever had to deal with. Then he puffs up his chest and starts with, how dare you question my integrity? You won't even let me tell my side of the story. Me. So were you blocking the doorway or not? Dan, no. Me. Okay, fine. I'm going to go check the security cameras. If I see otherwise, you're fired. I turn to walk away, and he immediately shouts out, Dan, then I'm fucking done, Ella snap. Me. Great. Pick up your last check tomorrow so I don't have to fucking deal with you ever again. At that point, I was done with this dude. He was a pain in the ass. Twice my age. Always acted like he was irreplaceable. Constantly complained about any job I put him on. It all just came out right then and there. As I walked away, his wife started screaming at him. A full-blown argument breaking out behind me. I got back in my car. The employee riding with me broke the silence with, so we're good, right? LOL. The aftermath. I went back and checked the security footage. And, surprise, surprise, Dan was 100% blocking the doorway while she was very clearly trying to leave. No sound, but you could see the several minutes of conversation while she visibly tried to exit. Fucking creep. Saw him at the store the other day. This happened a couple of years ago. Story 16. Here are just a few gems from my many years in HR at startups. 1. The senior manager who lied about his degree. We hired a very senior person, management level, and as part of his work visa process, I needed a copy of his university degree. I followed up repeatedly, but he kept making bullshit excuses. Oh, I just moved. I need to find where I put it. It might be in my parents' basement. I'll check next time I visit. Turns out, he had lied on his CV. He resigned immediately when he realized we were about to find out. 2. The CEO's after-hours activities. Regularly had threesomes with employees. Ordered coke taxis to the office. Yes, taxis that literally delivered cocaine. 3. The HR hiring process. When the head of HR went on maternity leave, the CEO took it as a golden opportunity to only consider internal candidates for the role. Pick the one he wanted to fuck, which he then did. 4. The office bathroom mystery. After a company party, the women's bathroom was completely backed up. Plumbers report. Multiple condoms stuffed down the sink. More condoms flushed down the toilets. Handprints and footprints on the tiled walls. Security footage showed that the last 3 people to leave the office that night were 3 straight men, all in relationships. 5. The company retreat from hell. An employee did too many mushrooms and shat himself on the beach in front of the entire company. 3 employees cheated on their partners. One of those affairs led to a divorce. 6. The developer's disgusting habit. Turns out, the developers never actually washed their glasses. They just rinsed them with water and put them back on the shelf. I hate it here. Story 17. Not HR, but I witnessed the most spectacular quit ever. I had a coworker at a bakery who quit in the most unhinged way imaginable. She was quirky, to say the least. The first time I met her, I was shoulder deep in a massive bowl of buttercream when I suddenly felt a hard slap on my ass. I spun around, totally shocked, my arms still covered in frosting, only to see a total stranger grinning at me. Her, "Hey girlfriend, which one's your favorite Prince song?" Me, "I'm not sure." Her, "Me neither. But if I had to pick, I'd take broccoli over asparagus any day." Then she just walked away. The legendary quit. One day, she was working up front, making coffees, helping customers, doing her thing. At one point, she was refilling the honey container we put out for customers. Now, this was a nightmare of a task. The honey came in a 50-pound tub. It had to be transferred into one of those tiny bear-shaped bottles. It was sticky, messy, and awful. In the middle of this, our manager called her to the back. I was by the ovens pulling out cookies when I overheard him informing her that she was being written up for tardiness. Which, to be fair, was totally justified. She was 15 to 30 minutes late every single day. He asked her to sign a document acknowledging the write-up for her file. Girlfriend lost her damn mind. She snapped. She started screaming and roasting this man's entire existence. His shoes? Ugly as hell. His wife's hair? Tragic. The way he walks. Looks like a duck with hemorrhoids. Then, in one fluid motion, she threw her hat at him, ripped off her shirt, buttons flying everywhere, tossed it onto his desk, and while shouting, smeared in sticky honey, she declared, "I quit your dumbass job." At this point, we were all frozen in shock. Then, she took it a step further. She removed her pants. Yes, she ripped off her own pants and threw them in the manager's face. She then stormed out of the bakery, wearing nothing but her undergarments, covered in honey, marching through a full line of customers, across the parking lot, and out to the bus stop. The whole time, still yelling. Our co-workers were just staring at the manager, giving him serious side-eye. The mystery of the pants. Now, here's the thing that baffles me to this day. The hat and shirt were issued by the bakery. They had the company logo on them. But the pants? Those belonged to her. So why the hell did she take them off too? I may never know. Story 18. Where should I even start? 1. The bathroom sex scandal. 2 employees were caught having loud sex in the restroom during shift change. No effort to be discreet. No shame. Just fully going at it while other employees were walking in and out. 2. The supply room hookup. A carpenter received a BP, blowjob performance review, from someone in finance in the supply room. 3. The Elvish-speaking employees. 2 employees on the manufacturing line pretended not to understand English and only spoke Elvish. This continued all the way to their termination. They even formally requested that all company documents be translated into Elvish. Oh, and they handwrote their PTO requests and other documents in what I assume was Elvish. I wish I was making this up. 4. The booger flicker. One interviewee spent the entire conversation picking his nose, rolling his boogers between his fingers, and casually flicking them. Never broke eye contact. Never paused the conversation. It was as if he didn't even realize he was doing it. 5. The murder porn guy. Another interviewee shared a sticky employee situation from his past job. Apparently, he once found porn on the company network, which, unfortunately, isn't that shocking. What was shocking? How he described it. Not pretty porn, you know. Like bestiality and murder porn. To each his own, but not at work. My biggest question was, where did you find this stuff, sir? 6. The Rush concert incident. A female employee was seen getting finger-banged, direct quote from witnesses, in a company suite at a Rush concert, in front of 20-plus employees and customers. Afterward, she stood up and shouted, "Big dicks are great, but big wallets are better." Best part? I had to describe the situation to the CEO, a very conservative Mormon man. While discussing damage control with the affected customers, I tried to be professional and said, "She was digitally penetrated." The CEO just blinked, then said, "Huh." At that point, I gave up and dropped finger bang on him. The man couldn't look me in the eye for months. Oh, and guess what? She got fired. He kept his job. Why? Because he brought in money. Total BS. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.